Good evening, King Louis-Philippe I and the last king of France in the year 1837. I have yet another stack of letters from your subjects in Mexico. It seems that French-owned businesses are continuing to get harassed under the chaos that is the First Republic of Mexico. Weird for you to specify who I am in the current year, but unbelievable. Why must our citizens endure such hardship? It's a good thing I'm such a patient man. Okay, what businesses have been affected this time? Well, it says here that a shoe shop was destroyed, and a butcher got all of his equipment stolen. Oh, and this one says it's a pastry shop that was looted on the outskirts of Mexico City. And it says here that all of the baked goods were stolen. Let's see, there's a couple more letters here. The complete disrespect. Eclairs. Macaroons. Croissants. What else is baguettes for free, without payment. Stolen for free. No payment. Croissants stolen. The complete disrespect. Your Majesty, are you okay? Is everything all right? Yes, Monsieur Mole. I have heard you loud and clear. And I'd like for you to give this letter to the President of Mexico. Our tale begins in the land of a newly independent country of Mexico, nearly 40 years before the American Civil War. The country looked less like this and more like this. In 1821, Mexico had just recently gotten out of a grueling 11-year war for independence from Spain. However, the decades following their independence from Spain would be nothing short of chaos, civil unrest, and political instability in the country. To give you an idea of just how crazy things were following their independence, with the exception of the first president, nearly every single administration would be overthrown by a military coup, and not a single president would complete their term for nearly 30 years. This inconsistent leadership left the country without policing, and the country subsequently fell into civil chaos. During one of the coups in 1828, the Parian Market in Mexico City, described as the emporium of commerce that stood for over a century, was set upon by a mob of 5,000 people. The rioters and looters ransacked the Parian Market. And among the businesses looted during what is known as the Parian Market incident, many of the businesses just so happened to be French-owned. The French government, run by King Louis-Philippe I, was obviously not too keen to hear that his subjects' businesses were getting destroyed in Mexico. So, his government demanded that Mexico pay a compensation on behalf of the destroyed French businesses, even threatening armed intervention from France if the situation did not improve. However, the King of France would eventually receive a letter that would set France over the edge. A pastry chef, only known by the name Monsieur Ramontel, wrote to the king claiming that his pastry shop was looted by Mexican soldiers. Mexican reports claim that the soldiers merely left the shop without paying the bill. In any case, the French government, upon hearing the news of Ramontel's shop, combined with years of destruction of French-owned businesses, outstanding debts from Mexico, and harassment of their citizens, decided enough was enough. The French government demanded the payment of 3 million francs, equivalent to about $22 million today, for all of the damages done to their citizens, an insane amount of money at the time. And when the Mexican government once again refused, the French government ordered a fleet of warships bound for Mexico, with orders to blockade the crucial port of Veracruz. However, Mexico was far from defenseless. The port of Veracruz was protected by San Juan de Ulua, a massive fortress located about half a mile in front of the city of Veracruz. Its 3-foot thick walls, 200 cannons, and nearly 800 soldiers stationed there made it an impenetrable fortress, impervious to any attack. The fortress was also surrounded by a shallow reef, making a direct frontal assault impossible. The French fleet at Veracruz realized that they were no match for the fortress, and with the majority of the crew suffering from yellow fever, they eventually had no choice but to fall back. However, On the 29th of October, 1838, a second fleet, much larger in size, arrived at Veracruz. In total, this second fleet was supported by around 400 guns. This fleet was under the command of Rear Admiral Charles Boudon, a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, he himself losing his right arm in the war. Despite Boudon's efforts to negotiate with the Mexican government, all would be in vain. The fleet would lay anchor for nearly a month as the Mexican government simply waited for the French to leave again. However, the French fleet this time around simultaneously used the time to survey and recon the area. They identified the depth of the ocean so they knew where to position themselves, and crucially, they were able to identify that the cannons in the fort were in rather poor condition. Years of chaos within the country had left the Mexican army under-equipped. On the 26th of November, 1838, Boudon's fleet moved into formation to ready the bombardment of Fort San Juan de Ulua. The next day, the bombardment began at 2:30 p.m. 3 frigates, 2 bomb ketches, unleashed their armament onto the fort, with the 4th frigate later joining the bombardment. It was said that the bombardment was so intense that they had to order for the smoke to clear in the fort just so that they could resume the cannon fire. Despite the might of the French fleet towering overhead, the Mexican soldiers at San Juan de Ulua put up a fierce resistance, firing back bravely. However, despite their valiant efforts, the bombardment would prove to be too much for the garrison at the fort. 2 powder depots would eventually be set off by one of the French cannon fire, and later, the signaling tower of the fort too was razed to the ground. By 8 p.m., the Rear Admiral gave orders to cease fire. Just 30 minutes after the ceasefire had been ordered, a Mexican boat was sent to parley with the French. However, Admiral Boudon would not accept anything but unconditional surrender, and even threatened to bombard the city of Veracruz itself if the fort didn't surrender. With such a terrifying ultimatum, the fort had no choice but to surrender. The bombardment of the fort had lasted just a single afternoon. The fort had suffered 220 men killed. The French had suffered 4 dead and 29 wounded. The fort, previously thought to have been impenetrable, had fallen to the enemy within a single day. However, the Mexican government would not yield. The Mexican government immediately ordered General Arista and General Santa Anna to recapture the city of Veracruz. At this point in time, General Santa Anna had actually been disgraced from the public due to his failure in the Texas Revolution. However, upon hearing the news of the defeat of the Mexican forces in Veracruz, Santa Anna came out of retirement to aid in the recapture of the city. This was his chance at redemption. The new army, led by Arista and Santa Anna, numbering 3,200 men, quickly arrived at Veracruz. Rear Admiral Boudon, however, remained undeterred. He would instead organize a daring raid on the city. The aim of the raid? Disarm the fortifications in the city and capture General Arista and Santa Anna. The raid began at 5 a.m. on the 5th of December, as 1,500 men rowed ashore to Veracruz, mostly made up of the ship's crew. The raiding force was split into 3 columns, 1 column on each side of the city and a center column. Veracruz had a wall of fortifications, and the raiding columns on each side would work their way up, disarming and dismantling the arms as they went, with the 2 columns meeting in the middle. The center column was tasked with blowing up the doors and securing the 2 generals at where they were suspected to have set up camp. The outside columns disarmed the wall fortifications with minimal resistance. However, the center column, upon blowing up the doors and storming the building where General Arista and Santa Anna were staying, began to meet fierce resistance. During the fight, Santa Anna managed to escape. However, General Arista was captured by the French forces. With General Arista captured, the center column began making their way back to the boats, along with the other 2 outer columns following behind. However, as the center column was loading up to their boats, they were hit by a counterattack, led by none other than General Santa Anna. The French opened fire on the Mexican counterattack with cannons loaded with grape-shot rounds. A cannon round specifically designed to scatter upon firing, designed to tear through infantry lines. Despite their heroic efforts to rescue General Arista, the grape shots shredded through the Mexican counterattack, even General Santa Anna's horse being killed, he himself being critically injured in the leg. The raid on Veracruz ended with another French victory. The French suffered 8 casualties compared to 31 Mexican soldiers killed in action. The Mexican government, after suffering 2 consecutive losses, realized they had no choice but to reopen negotiations, and eventually gave in to the demands of the French. Santa Anna would eventually go on to lose his leg from the wound received in his counteroffensive, nearing the brink of death for several days. However, although his counterattack had failed, he was still hailed as a hero to many of the citizens of Mexico for offering his service in the fight. His previous failures in the Texas Revolution, it seemed, had been redeemed. His heroism was further publicized to great extent, his leg even receiving a military burial in honor for his service. Although a relatively short conflict between the two countries, the Pastry War would sow the seeds that would change the nation forever. Santa Anna's rise to power seemed as an inevitability, and Mexico never did end up paying the French. Santa Anna would lead the nation into a war with the United States, the Mexican-American War, and the outstanding debt to the French was later used as justification for the much larger war that was to follow, a war that is the origin for the holiday Cinco de Mayo, and the outcome of which would cement Mexico as a nation destined for its own future. The Second Franco-Mexican War.